Welcome to the Explainer. There's this super powerful security tool that you probably already have access to, but maybe haven't even heard of. It's called the CAA record, and it's basically your domain's own personal digital bouncer. All right, so here's what we're going to cover. First, we got to understand why we even need this thing. We'll look at the web's trust problem. Then, we'll introduce our bouncer and see how they check the list. We'll even learn how to read the rules they're following. And finally, we'll talk about a few security gotchas. Sound good? Let's jump in. Okay, so before we get into the solution, we really need to wrap our heads around the problem it's trying to solve. You see, the very reason CAA records even exist, it really shines a light on a pretty big issue with trust on the internet. You know that little padlock icon, right? We've all been trained to look for it, to trust it. But here's the thing. The system that hands out those padlocks, those SSL/TLS certificates, it involves hundreds of different organizations. So what happens if just one of them messes up? What if they accidentally give a perfectly legit certificate for your website to a bad guy? And that is the heart of the problem. We're not talking about some super hacker breaking encryption here. No, this is much simpler. It's about a trusted company being tricked or just making a mistake. And a mistake like that, it could let an attacker create a perfect clone of your website, and your visitors and their browsers would be totally fooled. So how do you stop that from happening? Well, this is where a really clever security control comes into play. It's a simple idea that puts the power right back where it belongs, with you, the domain owner. It's called the Certification Authority Authorization Record, or CAA for short. All it is really is a simple public note that you, the domain owner, stick in your DNS, the internet's giant address book. You're basically just leaving a message for everyone to see, saying, hey, here's who I trust. Let's stick with that bouncer idea. Think of your domain as an exclusive club. The CA record, that's the guest list you hand to the bouncer at the front door. So any certificate authority, any CA that shows up wanting to issue a certificate for your domain has to check that list. And if their name's not on it, sorry, they're not getting past that velvet rope. Simple as that. All right, so a certificate authority shows up at your domain's front door with a request. How do they actually check this bouncers list? Well, the process is actually pretty methodical and honestly kind of smart. Okay, so the way they search is really clever. Let's say a CA gets a request for a certificate for, certs.sub.example.com. It doesn't just look right there. It starts there, sure. But if it doesn't find a CAA record, it starts climbing up the family tree. It checks the parent domain, sub.example.com. Still nothing? It climbs again to the main domain, example.com. And here's the key. The very first policy it bumps into on its way up, that's the one that counts. And this isn't just a nice-to-have thing. The official rulebook, RFC 8659, is super clear. It uses the word must. That means checking for a CAA record isn't optional. It's a mandatory, non-negotiable step for any CA that wants to be compliant. It's a hard rule, not just a suggestion. Okay, so the CA found your list. Now it just has to read it. And the good news is the rules you can set are actually pretty straightforward. So it all boils down to these three main tags. First, you've got issue. That's the most common one. It just says, this specific CA is allowed to issue certificates. Then there's issuewild, which, as the name suggests, is only for wildcard certs, the ones that cover star.example.com. And finally, there's iodef. That's basically a way to say, hey, if you see someone trying to break my rules, please send a report to this email address. Now, getting the difference between issue and issuewild is super important. An issue tag is for specific names, but if a CA gets a request for a wildcard certificate, they have to look for an issuewild tag first. And if they find one, it completely overrides any issue tags. This gives you really granular control over who gets to issue those super powerful wildcard certs. But what if you want to do the opposite? What if you want to say that nobody can issue a certificate for a domain? Well, you can do that too. You just create an issue record, but instead of a CA's name, you just put in a semicolon. That's it. That's a crystal clear signal to every CA out there. Do not issue any certificates for this domain, period. The system even has this really smart failsafe built in for the future. It's called the issuer critical flag. Think of it like this. If you set this flag on a rule, you're basically yelling, hey, this rule is absolutely critical. And if a CA comes along and sees a critical rule it doesn't understand, it has to slam on the brakes and refuse to issue the certificate. It's the ultimate stop sign, making sure important new rules don't get ignored by accident. All right, so CAA is definitely powerful, But it's not a magic wand. We need to talk about the fine print, the security loopholes you've got to be aware of. So it's really important to remember that CAA is just one layer of your security cake. It's not a silver bullet. For one thing, since it's just a DNS record, you really should lock down your DNS with something called DNSSEC, so attackers can't just fake your CAA rules. Also, CAA only stops unauthorized CAs. It can't stop a CA that's already on your list from making a mistake. And lastly, and this is a big one, this whole check only happens before a certificate is made. Your web browser, it never even looks at CAA records.
Yeah, the best way to think about CAA is as one really strong preventative layer. It's not working alone. It's part of a whole team of other security controls working behind the scenes, all to help keep the web secure.
So, what does this all boil down to? It's about control. It's about empowerment. Before CAA came along, pretty much any of the hundreds of public CAs could issue a certificate for your domain. But now, you get to create a clear, enforceable policy. You decide who's on the guest list, and that massively cuts down your risk of a bogus certificate ever being created. And that brings us to the final question, really. Now you know what this tool is, you know how it works, you know why it matters. So, who's on your domain's guest list?